In the vast expanse of the sky, some stories are etched not in contrails, but in the heart. Imagine a daughter's unwavering devotion, fueled by a faded photograph and a father's whispers from a distant past. What if the echo of a forgotten sacrifice could cut through the roar of modern jets, bringing an entire squadron to a hushed, reverent halt? Join us as we journey into a tale where the unwritten rules of honor transcend regulations, and the quiet legacy of one man's courage forever silences the sky. The radio crackled again, this time with a mocking edge, laced with amusement as the F-22 squadron circled around what looked like an antique jet barreling into restricted military airspace. "Is that a museum relic trying to sneak into the zone?" one of the pilots joked, sparking laughter across the comms. But that laughter died in an instant. The squadron leader swept past the vintage aircraft for a closer look, and the moment his eyes landed on the tail number, his expression hardened into something cold and sharp. It was just a handful of faded digits, yet those numbers stopped them all in their tracks, silencing the airwaves like a ghost had entered their ranks. Who was flying that old jet? And why did those digits, long thought buried with the past, send a chill down every spine? Captain Danielle "Dany" Reyes, 41, sat in the cockpit of the restored F-5 Freedom Fighter. Her hands, steady on the stick, bore the invisible weight of history. The same aircraft her father, Colonel Marco Reyes, a legend in his own right, once flew into a mission so secret it was never acknowledged, only whispered about behind closed doors. 22 years ago, he never came back. Now, the tail number 790721 sliced through the sky again, stitched back together from bones and memory. After her own honorable discharge, Dany had poured 6 relentless years into resurrecting that jet. She wasn't just bringing a machine back to life. She was chasing echoes. Every bolt tightened, every wire rewoven, was an act of remembrance, a quiet conversation with her father. The restoration took place mostly in solitude, deep in the hangar's silence. Her father's weathered logbooks spread before her like sacred texts. His meticulous handwriting on maintenance notes became her map through darkness. Those pages, stained with oil and time, guided her when fatigue blurred her eyes and grief threatened to undo her. She worked until the lines between metal and memory vanished. And then came the day she taxied onto the runway. The moment the wheels lifted, she felt it all rush through her, pride sharp as a blade, agony deep and old. Because she wasn't just flying a jet, she was stepping directly into the past, into the cockpit where her father breathed his final breath. She placed her gloved hand on the same throttle he once gripped, stared at the same instruments that had framed his last moments. This flight wasn't for show, it wasn't for closure. It was a reckoning with the ghost that haunted her and the man who had given his life in silence. The F-5's engines roared, echoing the sound that once lulled her to sleep as a little girl hiding behind hangar doors, watching her father suit up, watching a hero become myth. At 41, she finally understood everything she was too young to grasp then. The loneliness of command, the crushing weight of duty, the ache that comes after honor is paid in blood. Lost in the pull of memories and emotions too vast to name, Dany drifted unintentionally into restricted military training airspace. She didn't realize it until her radio came alive with urgency. Multiple fast-approaching contacts, Raptors, F-22s, the cutting edge of American aerial power. To the personnel on base, it looked like just another civilian joyrider in an old warbird, acting like rules didn't apply to them. They scrambled a full intercept group. Leading that 4-ship formation was Major Blake Carter, battle-tested, focused, a man known for swift decisions and cool nerves. He eyed his radar, one lone blip cruising right through the no-fly zone. No squawk, no response. Civilian, probably. Some nostalgic millionaire in a retro jet thinking the sky was theirs. "Unidentified aircraft," Carter barked into the mic. "You are in violation of restricted airspace. Turn to heading 270 immediately." No response. Carter narrowed his eyes and switched channels. "Flight, close formation. Let's make sure they get the message." The Raptors swept in, sleek and deadly, shadows cast by machines made for domination. Their angles sliced through the late afternoon like weapons drawn in a silent duel. They surrounded the lone F-5, prepared for whatever came next. Inside her cockpit, Dany heard the warning calls finally cut through the noise in her head. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from memory. She could feel her father in this moment. How many times had he faced this same protocol, sitting where she now sat? How many times had he been on the other side of this very maneuver, intercepting or being intercepted? She took a breath, then calmly keyed her mic. Military aircraft, this is Captain Danielle Reyes. I acknowledge your instructions. The voice was clear, measured, belonging to someone who had every right to be in that sky, someone who had once worn the uniform with pride. Up ahead, Carter stiffened. That voice, that name, Reyes. He couldn't help the reflex. Ma'am, state your intentions and aircraft type. A pause, then F-5 Freedom Fighter conducting test flight after restoration. Tail number 790721. Time collapsed for Carter. That number, it struck him like a blow to the chest. 790721. He had once burned that number into memory like a prayer. Suddenly, he was no longer the confident Major commanding Raptors. He was 23 again, a green lieutenant spiraling in a crippled F-16, smoke filling his canopy, the ground rushing up to meet him. Then, a flash of silver. An F-5, that F-5. Turning back, cutting through enemy fire, risking everything to drag him out. A tail number seared in fire and salvation. The ghost was real. Raptor 2's pilot sneered over the comms, his voice crackling with cocky disdain. Control, we've got visual on the bandit. Looks like some grandpa's antique trying to play fighter pilot. His wingman snorted. Roger that, Raptor 2. Museum piece confirmed. Probably runs on good intentions and nostalgia. Captain Danielle, Dany Reyes shut her eyes for a second, letting the words pass through her like wind through a ghost town. They didn't know. They couldn't know. This flight wasn't about proving herself. It was about honoring a man whose valor was erased from history, whose legacy lived not in monuments, but in the silence between classified lines. Her grip on the control stick tightened, knuckles white, gaze hardening with unwavering resolve. On the weather-beaten fuselage of her plane, the faded tail number 790721 still stood proud. Time had dulled the paint, but not the purpose. That number carried weight, a story etched into her bones. It was her father's aircraft, the one he never came back from. And today that number soared again, fueled by memory and fierce love. Control, a young voice cut in, light with amusement. Request permission to escort the antique back to civilian airspace. Should be quick work. The channel filled with laughter, fresh voices, untested voices, voices that hadn't yet stared death in the face or carried the weight of the names they'd lost. Major Blake Carter flew in silence, maintaining formation. But something was gnawing at him. Something about that number. 790721. It scratched at the edge of a memory, a ghost he'd buried long ago. And then it slammed into him. Desert Falcon. 22 years ago. He was Lieutenant Blake Carter back then, just 23, flying his first real combat sortie in an F-16 Fighting Falcon. That mission went to hell fast. Everything that could go wrong did. Ground fire ripped into his bird. Hydraulics were shredded, engine coughing, radio barely breathing. 50 miles behind enemy lines. Hostiles inbound. Alone bound. Dust until 790721 appeared out of the smoke and sun. An old F-5 Freedom Fighter. Outdated, outgunned, but flown by a man who defied both age and odds. Colonel Marco Reyes. Lieutenant Carter, the voice had said, calm in chaos. This is Colonel Reyes. I'm coming back for you. Sir, no, negative. You'll be outnumbered 4-1. That's not your call, son. Stay low, stay silent. I'll draw them off you. Carter could only watch, helpless, transfixed, as that lone F-5 peeled away and charged straight into death. 4 enemy fighters against 1 aging jet. No chance. No logic. But Reyes didn't fight like he was outnumbered. He fought like a man protecting what mattered most. For 8 eternal minutes, 790721 danced through fire. It twisted and flared and bled, a phoenix in its final flight. It gave Carter the seconds he needed to crawl back to friendly skies. Carter lived. Reyes didn't. The mission was buried, sealed under national security. No medals, no headlines, no graveside glory, just silence. Carter had carried it ever since. That tail number wasn't just an identifier. It was a ghost he never outran. And now there it was again, alive, flying. His hands trembled over the controls, breath caught in his throat. He wasn't staring at an old plane, he was looking into the past, at the ghost of the man who gave him a second chance. And then, like a wave crashing over stone, the final memory struck. Reyes's voice crackling through layers of static and gunfire. His last transmission. Control, this is 790721. Lieutenant Carter is clear. Repeat, Carter is clear. Tell my daughter. Tell Danielle her old man flew with angels today. Then the static swallowed everything. Carter's voice broke as he keyed the mic. 22 years of silence broke with it. Control, abort pursuit, I repeat, abort all intercept procedures. Confusion filled the channel. Lead, what's going on? It's just some old... It's not just some old anything. Carter cut in, his voice like thunder, raw and shaking with truth. That tail number, 790721, that's Colonel Marco Reyes' plane. That's the bird that saved my life 22 years ago. And for a moment, the airwaves went still. Silent, reverent, because every pilot listening now understood. And someone finally said what everyone was thinking. Sir, Colonel Reyes died in that plane. No, Carter whispered, voice barely more than breath. Yet the weight behind it was undeniable. Whoever's flying her now, they're not just carrying a plane. They're carrying his legacy. Almost in unison, the four F-22 Raptors throttled back, their sleek formations softened, transitioning from a tactical intercept to something altogether different. An escort not of dominance but of reverence. Inside the old F-5, Dany heard it all. Every nuance of the radio chatter. The quiet shift from suspicion and mockery to something solemn. The aching crack in the squadron leader's voice when he uttered her father's name. With trembling fingers, she keyed her mic. Her voice emerged thick, the emotion too heavy to hide. Major Carter, this is Captain Danielle Reyes, Marco's daughter. There was silence. Then Carter's breath caught. A hitch, faint but filled with shock. The daughter. The little girl he had once heard in that final transmission so long ago. She wasn't just a memory, she was real. She was here, and she was flying her father's aircraft. Captain Reyes. Carter's voice struggled to hold steady, but the reverence in it was unmistakable. 22 years ago, your father saved my life. Today, flying beside him again, even just as a memory, is the greatest honor of my career. The sky remembers everything. And in that moment it did. The arrogance of the present gave way to a debt carved into history. Some sacrifices are too immense to be forgotten. Their impact reverberates beyond time, etched into the very air itself. These are debts that money can never repay. Only deep, unwavering respect can. Do you believe one person's sacrifice can ripple through time, shaping everything in its wake? If you feel the pull of history in your bones right now, if the gravity of it settles in your chest, then you felt it too. Control, this is Raptor Lead, Carter radioed, his tone sharpened with urgency. I need an immediate verification on tail number 790721. Pull the classified files. Authorization, Carter Delta 779. The frequency went eerily silent. Carter had just invoked his highest security clearance, one reserved for situations of national consequence, or for heroes lost in battle whose stories had been buried too deep. Raptor lead, standby, came the tower's eventual reply. Accessing classified archives now. The minutes stretched out like molasses. In the sky, the F-22s maintained their new distance, no longer hunters tracking an unknown threat, but silent guardians escorting something sacred. Inside the F-5 cockpit, Dany felt every one of those 22 years crashing down on her. The weight wasn't just in the aircraft, but in the memories, the silence, the unanswered questions. Her entire adult life had existed beneath the long shadow of a man she barely knew. A father remembered more by others than by her. She had borne the burden of his sacrifice with no official record to anchor it, only faded photos, whispered stories, and a name barely spoken anymore. Her hands, steady now on the stick, were calloused from years of labor. 6 years she had given to this aircraft, restoring it bolt by bolt. Every single sleepless night inside the hangar. Every denial letter from historians who told her the mission never happened. Every cold look from officials who labeled her a grieving daughter clinging to myths. But the mission was real. The ghosts were real. And now, at last, someone else remembered too. Raptor led, this is Control, file retrieved, classification, eyes only. Operation Desert Falcon, February 15, 2003. Carter's heart pounded against his ribs, bracing for what came next. Colonel Marco Antonio Reyes, call sign Phoenix, aircraft, F-5 Freedom Fighter, tail number 790721. Mission status, killed in action while conducting unauthorized search and rescue operation behind enemy lines. Carter sat up straighter in his seat. Unauthorized? His voice cut through the frequency. Control, that's incorrect. Colonel Reyes was ordered to... Negative, Raptor lad, the controller interrupted, voice firm. Official records confirm Colonel Reyes broke formation against direct command to retrieve a downed pilot. The rescue was successful. The pilot survived. Colonel Reyes did not return. Carter's world tipped on its axis. All these years he had believed in a different story, that a hero had followed orders, executed protocol. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was far more powerful, far more devastating. He had been saved by a man who deliberately defied orders, who knew the cost and chose to pay it anyway. Marco Reyes had sacrificed more than his life. He'd sacrificed his name, his honor, his career, his future. He had given up everything so that another life could continue. Carter's throat was tight now. He forced the words out. Control? Who was the rescued pilot? There was a pause, then quietly. Lieutenant Blake J. Carter, service number 7749285, current rank, Major, presently flying as Raptor lead. The words hit harder than anything else had. Carter was silent, breath stolen by the truth. Marco Reyes hadn't just saved him. He had traded his own life for it. A life for a life. And no one had ever told the story right, until now, survived. He went through with it anyway. Control, there's more in that file. You need to read it, sir. What followed was not a debriefing, not a report. It was something far more intimate. A personal message, recorded by Colonel Marco Reyes during what would be the final moments of his life. The audio, damaged and broken by battle, crackled with static. Still, through the distorted noise and fading signals, the voice of a man long gone emerged, a final echo of courage. If anyone is hearing this, my name is Colonel Marco Reyes, came the voice, calm despite the chaos. My bird's going down. But Lieutenant Carter's safe, that's all that matters. The transmission stuttered, peppered with the harsh bursts of distant explosions and the failing systems of a dying jet, but Marco kept speaking, as if determined to send his truth through the storm. To whoever finds this, tell my daughter, Danielle, tell her her father died doing what was right, not what was legal, the right thing. There's a difference. More static. His voice was growing weaker, but his conviction never wavered. Tell her some rules are meant to be broken. When a life's on the line, honor is greater than orders. Love matters more than regulations. Then came silence, a pause so long it seemed the message was over. But then, barely above a whisper, fragile but unwavering, he added, tell my little girl, angels don't follow flight plans. They follow their hearts. A brief flicker, then finality. Phoenix 790721, going dark. And then nothing. 22 years of unanswered questions collapsed into a single devastating moment of truth. 22 years of bureaucratic silence and red tape dissolved under the weight of a father's final words. Dany's breath caught. Her chest heaved as emotions surged through her, too vast to contain. Tears finally slipped down her cheeks, tears she had kept locked away for over 2 decades. Her father hadn't just said goodbye. He had passed down a creed, a belief, a way of life that valued the soul over the rulebook, compassion over command. When Carter finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, trembling beneath the burden of gratitude that had waited far too long to be voiced. Captain Reyes, your father didn't just save my life. He showed me what real honor looks like. He taught me that sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is be willing to be called a traitor for the right reasons. Silence spread across the airwaves. The usual chatter from the other F-22 pilots had vanished. What they were witnessing was no longer a mission. It was a reckoning, a sacred moment 2 decades in the making. Debts unpaid, truths unspoken. Until now. "Control, this is Raptor Lead," Carter said, his voice now filled with quiet authority. "I'm declaring emergency escort protocol. Priority Alpha. We're initiating full honors escort for 790721 to her destination. Raptor Lead, please clarify the nature of the emergency." Carter didn't answer immediately. He chose his words like they were sacred, each one carrying the weight of a legacy that had been silenced too long. "Control, the pilot of 790721 is the daughter of a fallen hero. She's flying her father's aircraft on a memorial mission. Colonel Marco Reyes died saving American lives 22 years ago. Today, his legacy takes to the skies once more, and we will see that she finishes her flight with the honor and respect her father never received." A beat of silence. Then, "Roger, Raptor Lead, all airspace is cleared. You are authorized to proceed with full military escort." The shift was immediate. The 4 F-22 Raptors moved into formation, not as interceptors, not as a threat, but as guardians, honor guards. The sleek, lethal birds, the most advanced fighters on the planet, now flew beside an aging F-5, a plane built long before some of these pilots were even born. But today, that humble fighter carried more than an aging fuselage. It carried the memory of a man who had chosen to follow his heart instead of his orders. And now the skies honored him. Carter switched to a private channel. His voice, though steady, held a softness reserved only for Dany. "Captain, I tried. For years. I tried everything to get your father the recognition he earned. Medal of Honor nomination, congressional inquiries, testimonies, but they buried it all because he broke protocol. To save me." Dany's voice came through, quiet but unshaken, even as tears continued their silent stream. "He never wanted medals, Major. He just wanted to do the right thing." "I know, but you deserve to know. Your father proved that sometimes. The highest form of duty is disobedience." Carter then switched back to the open channel, addressing every Raptor in formation. His words weren't just for the pilots, they were for history. "All Raptors, listen up. 22 years ago, the pilot of 790721 told Control he was flying with angels. Today, I finally understand what he meant. Angels don't follow flight plans. They follow their hearts. And right now, all of us, we're flying with angels too." From the cockpit of her father's jet, Dany smiled through her tears. The weight she had carried for more than half her life began to lift. Her father's voice, his truth, had finally broken through to the silence. And for the first time in 22 years, Marco Reyes' sacrifice was no longer hidden behind red tape. It was honored. Not with medals, not with parades, but with something far more sacred. The warriors understood the true meaning of honor, bound by the vast, endless sky that carried them forward. Both the living and the dead, the honored and the forgotten, flew together in formation, heading home. When Captain Danielle, Dany Reyes' wheels touched down at Edwards Air Force Base, she was not alone. 4 F-22 Raptors had escorted her home, their presence a silent salute. News of the memorial flight had spread like wildfire throughout the aviation community. On the ground, crews stood at attention as the aging F-5 taxied slowly to the ramp. This was no mere ceremonial gesture. This was genuine respect from people who knew the weight of what they had just witnessed. Major Blake Carter approached as Dany climbed down from the cockpit, her legs trembling from the flood of emotions that the flight had stirred. Removing his helmet, Blake revealed tears glistening in his eyes. "Captain Reyes," he began, voice thick with feeling, "I owe you an apology." She looked up at him, waiting. "For 22 years, I've carried the guilt of surviving when your father didn't. I believed I owed him a debt I could never repay." His voice cracked as he continued. "But today, I realized something different. He didn't save me so I could live burdened by guilt. He saved me so I could truly live, with purpose." Understanding washed over Dany's face, softening her features. She knew deep down that's exactly what he would have wanted. Within hours, Dany found herself inside the base commander's office, surrounded by officers who had never met her father but had heard his story and honored it all the same. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base commander, rose to greet her. Captain Reyes, on behalf of the United States Air Force, I want to offer you something that should have been offered decades ago. She gestured toward a memorial wall adorned with photographs of fallen airmen. We want to add your father's photograph and story to our wall of honor. Dany's breath caught. Not officially, she whispered. The bureaucrats still won't allow that. But here, in this squadron, among people who truly understand sacrifice, we found something better. Major Carter stepped forward, holding a framed photograph. It showed a young pilot standing beside an F-5 helmet tucked under his arm, smiling brightly at the camera. The tail number 790721 was clearly visible. This was taken 3 days before the mission, Blake said softly. I kept it in my personal files all these years. I never knew why. Until now. The young pilots of the F-22 squadron gathered around studying the photo with quiet reverence. Captain Sarah Chen was the first to speak. Sir, he looks so young, younger than I am now. He was 28, Dany said quietly, the same age I was when I started restoring his plane. Ma'am, another pilot asked, why did you spend 6 years rebuilding it? Wouldn't it have been easier to just let it rest? Dany's gaze lingered on the photograph of her father, then swept over the eager faces surrounding her. These pilots were the future, the next generation who would face impossible choices high above the clouds. Because some lessons couldn't be taught in classrooms or simulators. They had to be felt in the heart, when you were up there alone, confronted with a decision between following orders and saving a life. I wanted you to know that someone before you chose courage, she said, her voice steady yet filled with conviction. Someone chose to break the rules because a human life mattered more than protocol. The room fell silent. These were pilots trained in precision, discipline, and obedience, but they were also human, capable of understanding that sometimes humanity must take precedence over hierarchy. Colonel Hayes then made an announcement that would resonate throughout the squadron for years to come. Effective immediately, we are establishing the Reyes Leadership Program. Captain Reyes will serve as our ethics advisor, teaching new pilots about moral courage under fire. Not the kind you read about in manuals, but the kind you carry deep in your heart. Dany accepted the role not for recognition, but for the chance to ensure her father's sacrifice would continue to save lives, not just in combat, but in the countless moments when pilots faced the choice between the easy path and the right one. The memorial flight had grown into something far greater, a living bridge spanning the past and the future, linking the sacrifices of one generation to the promises of the next. 6 months later, Dany stood before a fresh group of pilot trainees at Edwards Air Force Base. Behind her, prominently displayed on the wall, hung the photo of Colonel Marco Reyes alongside his meticulously restored F-5 Freedom Fighter. She looked out over the eager faces and asked, who can tell me the difference between courage and recklessness? A young lieutenant was quick to raise his hand. Ma'am, courage follows protocol. Recklessness breaks it. Dany's smile was tinged with sadness. That's what the textbooks say, she thought. But no textbook ever saved a life at 30,000 feet. She moved toward the window where the trainees could see the flight line. Modern F-35s stood silently next to her father's vintage F-5, a testament to history and progress, side by side. My father taught me a lesson the day he died, even though I didn't fully understand it until years later, she began softly. There are numbers, symbols, tail codes, things that seem forgotten or irrelevant, but they carry legacies that never fade. The room fell completely silent. 22 years ago, my father faced a choice: follow orders and let a fellow pilot perish, or break those orders and save a life. He chose to save the life. The military called it unauthorized. History calls it heroic. She turned back to face them, her eyes steady. Each of you will face that moment someday. Maybe not in combat, maybe during a training accident, told to wait for clearance while someone's life hangs in the balance. Maybe when you're ordered to abandon a search and rescue because it's deemed too dangerous. Maybe when you have to choose between your career and your conscience. The lieutenant, who had spoken earlier, raised his hand again. Ma'am, how do we know when to break the rules? You'll know, Dany said with quiet certainty, because your heart will tell you that a human life is worth more than any regulation ever written. My father used to say, angels don't follow flight plans. They follow their hearts. She gestured toward the photograph on the wall. Colonel Marco Reyes never received a Medal of Honor. His name doesn't grace any official memorial, but his legacy soars in every pilot who chooses humanity over hierarchy, love over law. As the class began to file out, one young pilot lingered behind. Captain Reyes, he asked earnestly, will we ever reach a point where doing the right thing doesn't require breaking the rules? Dany considered the question carefully. Perhaps, she said slowly, but until that day comes, I hope there will always be pilots brave enough to choose conscience over convenience. That evening, Dany climbed into her father's F-5 for one final flight. As she ascended through the clouds, she spoke softly to the empty cockpit. Dad, your numbers may have faded on paper, but your legacy still owns the sky. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the clouds in brilliant shades of orange and gold. Far below, the lights of the airbase twinkled like stars, where a new generation of pilots was learning that some lessons cannot be taught. They must be inherited. Names may be forgotten on the ground, but in the sky, legends never die. They simply fly higher, waiting to guide the next soul brave enough to choose what's right over what's easy.